Excellent. Good. How about others? Where you're spending time on something now may not be necessary, but it's gonna save you time in the future.
I had one for like onboarding new undergraduate researchers or like Master of Engineering students to a research project. I realized I was trying to find articles or literature to get them up to speed on the topic.
Yeah.
And if I took maybe an hour or 2 hours to find the best resources to get them up to speed in their fastest amount of time. And then I just send them that PDF with all the links. So then that speeds it up for them and speeds it up for me.
Okay, very good. I see. So rather than sort of doing it by hand every time, you kind of wrote it down. Yeah. You know, on that note, Michael, actually, it's a great point. One thing I have done recently, I started maybe 10 years ago, but I started these papers, these little Google Docs that are advice on X, like advice on writing papers or advice on giving talks, right? And I'm going to share one of them with you guys when we get to the talks class. But what it is that exactly what you're saying, because I found myself over the years just saying the same stories and advice, and then I started putting it down on paper, and now it's actually grown. And every month or two, I put in, remember another thing or come up with another idea and put it in there. But now that is an incredibly great document, or these documents, you know, advice on going to conferences. And I have a whole bunch of advice on that. So I have all these things, but each one of those documents took a fair amount of time for me to sit down and write, but it saved me time later because I just point I have students read those. So that's an interesting one, right? When you're doing something, like you find yourself doing something repetitive, just putting it down on paper so someone can read it, so you don't have to, you know, spend that time repeating it. Good example. Good. And you can imagine that, by the way, in all of your cases in your lab or where you're working in research, that, you know, as you've mentioned, onboarding people is a great example. People come in, you have to go tell them a lot of things and advice. But if you put that on paper, you say, hey, look, read this and then let's talk. Right? Good. Good example. Okay. Anything else that you guys do or that you've done recently that you felt maybe you put in a little time, but it's going to save you time in the future down the road?
I just had a quick question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on what everyone in this class thinks. Like, I know you talked about spending time at one time in order to save you time in the future. Some people talked about examples, but I'm curious on what people think about like your productivity slowly declining as you spend time on it. And if you think that, you know, perhaps not doing everything at once to save you time later, that like even just splitting up that very urgent thing in between times and using whatever leftover time that day to do other things that aren't urgent would actually might save you more time than doing the urgent thing all at once. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I'm curious on what people think about this and how it's a little different than just doing everything at once and saving time in the future. Yeah, that makes sense. But like, how does this productivity work into it? Because I know if I spend 4 hours on something, I'm much slower at doing it than I was 3 hours ago. So.
Good. Okay, good. So you're building in like a fatigue model, right? That's a great point. You're right. And they don't, these time management experts aren't really factoring that in, right? They want to get done that thing,
right?
So it's off your list. But if here's an example, if you're writing a piece of code, right? I think most of us will relate to this, that you will write that and then you'll get, you know, there'll be a bug or something and you can make yourself crazy trying to solve that bug. The best thing is always put it away, put it aside, do something else. And then you come back and you find the bug instantly, right? So you're right. That's a great corollary to try and push everything to do everything once. Good. Anyone else have points like that or want to share that? That you also have to sort of budget out your time or your attention or your, you know, just because you do get tired.
I think for me, the problem splitting up important tasks over time is that it gives me like flexibility where I will, if I'm given flexibility in doing the quadrant 1 task, then I'm going to end up, putting aside the quadrant 2 task.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's like quadrant 1 task is like split over multiple days, I'm going to spend multiple days on it. Like that's how it works. And so it's easier to give myself the last day to do the quadrant 1 task. So it's like procrastinating in a way, but sometimes procrastinating helps me do things quicker.
Okay, good. Let's talk about that. Effective procrastination. Who's a fan of that? Right? I mean, that's the idea is there's actually, it's most efficient to really wait till the last minute and then just, you're up against the wall. You got to get it done. And then you will probably get it done in the less time than you would have if you started it earlier. Do others agree with that?
Yeah, I totally. I'm sorry. Wait, you can talk, Preston. I already talked.
No, I'm looking at the XK CD comments.
Oh, well, I mean, I know, like you were talking about at the beginning of class, this anxiety, or not anxiety, but the adrenaline rush you get from, cutting it real close to meetings. I think that also applies to assignments. I definitely do I'm way more motivated to do something an hour before it's due than a week before it's due, but that's just me.
Interesting. Okay. Wait, we did get a couple of cartoons coming in here from Robin. All right, maybe we should look at them. On this note, what is this? This is how long can you work on making routine tasks more efficient for spending more time to save? Okay. Okay. Good. Yeah, if you do a task 50 times a day, you shave off a second. Oh, this is over 5 years. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly relevant to our topic. Good. Thank you. Wait, there's another one here. I don't want to see that one too. Spent a lot of time with this. I read a program automating it. Work. That's a good one too. All right, on automation. Yeah. So yeah, because I was thinking about that too. Writing little macros, like keyboard macros for something that you do a lot, or even just cleaning up your bookmarks and all that stuff. That it can take a lot of time, and you kind of get in fiddling with it and all this stuff, and then that's a great way to procrastinate, by the way. Finding your time savers. Great, good. All right, NC has another one. We got to take a moment for these. These are important. These are excellent. I like that you guys could just pull those out, index those really fast. All right, yeah. So listen, all these systems are there's exceptions, and none of them work perfectly. But let's just talk about things that you find have been helpful for you guys, aside from like matrix or formulas or things like that. But what do you find that's helpful for you to keep to do time management? Is there a tool that you particularly like, that helps you organize, helps you stay organized? Anyone want to share one?
I have just like a question about the video, or
Yeah.
I had trouble reconciling like this 2x2 grid with the like filter he introduced. Because when I was thinking about like the filter, I feel like the things that I would be doing all the time are those like urgent, important things. And all of the things that would just keep going back to the top and like keep cycling around would be like the things that are important. That yeah, aren't urgent, but then they're never urgent, but they're the important ones and that I don't do them. So I don't know if anyone had like, yeah, insight in how that like overlapped with this 2x2 or how they're not in conflict with each other. Cause to me, it felt like, I don't know. Yeah, kind of like a conflict.
My
Mhm.
takeaway on that funnel was that a lot of things seem super urgent and super important. You got them done right now. But I think the takeaway was that most things really aren't. And the things that are, just getting better at prioritizing the things that you must do now and looking at your bigger objectives and mapping those actions to that.
Yeah.
I also wanted to add like the point from the TEDx talk, you know, I thought was extremely meaningful. It's actually really funny. I was discussing the same topic with one of the grad students that I was working with during my master's, basically like using the X and Y axis when you write any to-do list. Instead of writing a list, put it on like on an XY where you don't only look at what's urgent, but you also look at what's important. And so when you map out your to-do list on an XY, it always makes it easier to know what to prioritize and what to do first and what will save you time later.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, no, I think that trick is reasonable. I'll tell you what I think is a really big time waster is when you have a lot of things that you're working on, as most of you do, and you end up spending a lot of time just looking at this list over and over again. And you kind of, you know, you thrash, right? You start working on one thing, and in the back of your mind, you're thinking, wait, I got to be working on this other thing, right? And then you context switch, and then you switch back, and you do that. That's very, very that really can wear you down. It's not efficient use of time, and you end up just sort of thinking through, trying to decide what to do next, and you're essentially eating a huge amount of your time on that. Does anybody relate to that?
I really relate to that. I'm pretty obsessive about my to-do list and figuring out if I can take a break or not instead of like taking the break. You know, like
Right.
figuring out like will I survive if I take this break? You know?
Yeah.
So that's a big problem for me. Yeah.
One thing I want to add on that point is I find it that, you know, when I write a to-do list in like series, and sometimes they're just like big tasks and small tasks mixed together. And so you'd like have a big task at the top of the list, and then, you know, the things on the bottom are like really quick, like a 2-minute email, and then they end up getting done very late just because there's something much bigger. So kind of separating to-do lists into things that can be done quickly versus, you know, that will take a lot of time and have a lot of blockers is helpful. I mean, at some point, something.
Actually, I'm gonna just let me interrupt you because I want to give everyone time. One thing I do think is interesting is that I often have two lists, a shorter term, a longer term list that I always keep, and then the short term, which is like, what am I doing today? And so that's exactly to Selena's point, that, you know, if you just have everything together, you'll end up, it just looks overwhelming. And and I also think, to Mackenzie's point, you know, this idea of, I think that because we're engineers, we like to optimize things, and we can tend to be get into this trap of saying, I want to make sure I'm doing exactly the right thing with my time right now. But that takes so much overhead to figure out what's exactly the right thing that it actually takes away a lot of the productive time that you might have. Okay, how about some of the people who haven't spoken up yet? Let's hear from some others about your time management. Anybody's got some good tricks you could share? Anything that works for you?
The best thing that I've done is not do everything by myself and split it up with other people, especially with the same homework problem or the same lab report. There's no point in everybody recreating their own wheel. If it's the same data and the same problems, we can all do a portion of it and explain it to the rest. Say, hey, this is how I did it. Do you agree, disagree?
Oh, so you delegate, you're saying, between like a study group, is that what you mean?
Yeah, like a study group, but just dividing up labor. I mean, why have one class? It's not feasible to do the work required of that class. as it takes up about 60% of my entire week. So
Mhm.
I've gotten together with others to just divide and conquer,
Mhm.
basically.
Mhm. I see. Okay. Right.
Best way to save time is by not spending it on things like that.
Right. You're saying don't do everything yourself, right? That's a really good one. Delegate. Okay.
Like in terms of delegating, I think maybe a question that's good for discussion is, I find it sometimes that in courses where, doing the problem sets in a group and splitting tasks and ends up leading to like less mastery of the material, where like the things that you do, you end up knowing very well on the tests or on later assignments. And then the things that you end up delegating, you don't get as good as a grasp on the things that you sort of struggle with and do on your own. So I think finding that balance between working with others and delegating within a homework, that balance is always challenging. So I don't know.
No doubt. Yeah, no doubt.
On that.
Good. All right. Well, how about, I did also see someone mention, I think you're obviously joking, but don't sleep. But, what about sleep? We talked about this actually, if I remember, about how many hours of sleep everybody gets, and it was a big variation. That's interesting because I tend to say if I have something to do, sleep always gets pushed off. Like I'll just get it done and then go to sleep. And then last night is a perfect example. I did not get enough sleep last night. So, I think that's where, how do you balance that? Do they have a sort of policy for that? Like you always go to sleep at a certain time to make sure you get enough sleep, or how are you disciplined that way?
I just had an answer to your earlier question about like, how do you, make sure you're kind of like managing the time overall. It's somewhat aspirational. I don't know how much I actually implement it, but like at the beginning of the semester, I tried to like allocate, okay, on average, I want to spend 20% of my time on this, 30% on this, 40, 50, and then, sort of like weekly check in against that.
That's
to
interesting.
See, how it's going, or to try to adjust the next week.
Yeah, how do you allocate appropriately? I mean, because things wax and wane, sometimes things overlap and peak simultaneously.
Yeah,
no, but she's rebalancing her portfolio. Like, she has a goal. Think of it financially, right? So the values have changed, but then she kind of like reallocates. It's interesting. Okay.
I don't like meticulously keep the records. It's a little bit more just like on feel, or like, looking at least like, okay, I crossed all these things off the to-do list. Did that line up with that 50% of them were supposed to be research or not? Like,
something that helps me with that particular task is having like a master to-do list that just like whenever there's something that needs to be done, just throw it there. But then that's not what I actually use. And then when I sit down into like chunks of time, like maybe 3 hours at a time or like an hour and a half at a time, depending on the day, I would just like extract what is reasonable to be done in this time slot from that like master to-do list. That sometimes helps me when there's a lot to do and very little time.
So this is interesting because I think that this idea of to-do list, the art of a to-do list is really interesting. I think everybody's probably developed their own methods for it. But I have lists that are sort of in these columns of different, home and work and research and teaching. And so I'll try to organize that way. And then, as you said, I have another list for, today or today and tomorrow or something. I mean, it's really interesting. I think everybody sort of evolves this. Nobody ever really teaches us the optimal way. But it's a really interesting topic to me, is how you do it. And then there's also all these tools like Asana and all these things that, you have a tool that keeps your list, and then you can put deadlines on it, right? Especially you can share this with other people. Like, I guess Slack is like that, right? For management.
Slack has a lot of like bots and apps that you can install to help with tasks. There's something called fireflies.ai. You basically just like Slack yourself or something, and it just like auto creates a to-do list. Sometimes that is helpful, but to be honest, sometimes it ends up being a drag.
How about others? Is there a tool that you use, any kind of software that you find really like that helps keep your things going? Anyone?
What was the question?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Josh.
What tools are you using that anybody have a piece of software or something that they really like that they keep track of their lists or time management? I've tried a lot of these over the years, and I basically it's always this. I have pads and pads and pads, but I always put the date on them and I keep track of them. It's like a lab log, but it's like I can always find something because I could go back from like 3 weeks ago and just page through it and find where I was, but those, and every week I on Sunday usually I sit down and recopy it. So I have just a to-do list. So they're nice and clean for the beginning of the week. Okay, well, let me share with you, and we're gonna just take another 15 minutes, and I'm gonna just share with you one other thing, which I put in the syllabus. I don't know if you got a chance to look at it, but this is on time management, and I wanted to share with you this book. It's the 24/6. Now, I'm also, I'm on full disclosure, that is a book that my wife wrote, and it just came out in paperback yesterday. So I'm not promoting it, but I'll just tell you what it basically says. It's 24/6 is about taking one day off a week, okay? And it's based on something that we've been doing for 10 years now. And it's the idea that we take one day where there's no work. And it means that no screens, in fact, the way we've translated it. So we just don't look at screens on Saturdays in our family. So from Friday night until Saturday, we just have a rule that you don't look at screens. And that means no phone, no TV, no, we're not like Orthodox religious or anything. But it's just a way of giving ourselves a break. And our kids do it too, which is interesting. So there's no, they don't do any games or anything like that. No texting with your friends or anything. Now, I'll just describe it. The way this came about was when I was in grad school, and I was very stressed and always felt the pressure that there was more work to do. It was very, very. It just always felt that if I was doing anything, I should be reading more papers, I should be doing more experiments or writing more code. So what happened when I went to Israel, I was living. I took a year off and I went to Israel, and I was living in Haifa. And what was interesting was on Saturday everything shuts down, and so there was nothing to do, and I couldn't go to the lab. I couldn't even get on the computer. I think this was before internet really. So, but what was interesting was I ended up just hanging out and got into painting and reading and walking around and all this stuff. But what I found was that by the time Sunday would roll around, I was incredibly refreshed. And I'd get up really excited about getting back to work. And so I usually get up really early, drink a big cup of coffee, and I would get more done on Sunday than if I had worked the whole weekend. So I kept that going when I came back, and I still do it now. And when I met my wife, we started doing it. And it's very interesting. I mean, this whole book has a lot of tips and ideas about how to make it work. But I want to just put it out there to you guys. I don't want to, it's not for everyone. And I know it sounds a little scary to sort of like, close things off, but there is something we found that works really well. And it's just like mental break and letting yourself do something else where you have no obligation to do work for one day a week. So I'm going to just throw it out there. Does that sound, what do you guys think about that?
I have the book if anybody wants it.
Who does?
Preston does.
You got it?
Yeah, I just did.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Thank you. Well, the thing is that it's a practice, and so here's what I would suggest if it's of interest to you. You don't need the book actually, but just the main thing is to just give it a try. And by that I mean don't commit. You're not talking about any major commitment, but just trying one day. Like then you pick it, whether it's Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, whatever you want. But you're just saying, this is a day I'm not going to work. And it's helpful to let off the screen too, because it's interesting how the screen tends to pull you back into all kinds of obligations and patterns. But if you don't have the screen, it's very interesting how you can get along surprisingly well. You'll end up.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Robin.
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know. I've actually been doing this since the semester started. Not with the screens included, because screens are really important to me and games are my leisure time. But
Okay.
but I've actually found it to be super helpful. I do the same thing and don't do any work willfully on Saturdays. And it's really nice because I don't actually feel like less productive on Saturday, because I end up doing things like getting the rest of my life together, like buying groceries and cleaning
Nice.
up my living space, and generally feeling like a whole person and not a frantic grad student. So yeah, I would recommend.
Good. Okay. So that's
Robin,
interesting. So
do you have
take a full
advice?
day, though.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Joy.
Oh, I was just going to ask, what is the advice on getting started again the next day? I find once I have the 1 day break, I want the forever break, and so, yeah, sometimes I find I like the idea, but I find once I take a whole day off, then the next day it's even harder to get started. I don't know, maybe it's just developing the habit, but if anyone has tips on that.
Yeah, I think just getting into the habit, really, as you said, is the key thing. I don't know, I've spent pretty much most of my academic life procrastinating, so I'm used to like picking things up after a long break. But I feel like having like a designated physical space where you're doing work as compared to where you're not doing work is really useful. So maybe on Saturday, if you're like me, if you clean up your living area and like set up your desk and move your clutter and make it into like a productive workspace, and then just don't touch that until Sunday, and you come back and you sit down at your desk and you're like, okay, now I'm in this work environment and this is where I'm going to start.
I want to just add a really tiny point to that as well. I think social accountability is always helpful. Talking to friends and family about like, here's kind of the stresses that I'm dealing with at the current time, and keeping each other, and then listening to what they have to do, and then keeping each other accountable is a method that works sometimes as well.
That's interesting. So you're saying like if you sort of make a plan with a friend, like we're going to do this together. Right?
Yeah, like
that tends to work.
Like a gym buddy, basically, right?
Yeah, basically like a gym buddy for like, but even if it's not the same tasks, like even if we're working on totally different things, but like, hey, I need to do this, you need to do that. Let's just check in a few hours and make sure that we made progress. Yeah.
Well, that's good. But I'm getting back to this idea of taking a break. If you do it with someone, it's interesting. I think that what Robin's talking about is that you actually do, cleaning up is actually something else that it's interesting because I'm listening to you and I hear you and I really like that. I love a clean desk, but I almost never make the time to do that. But I think it's really a great thing. Like if you give yourself that day, and that's usually the day when I will like put things away, and then I come back on Sunday and it's clean and I'm really excited to get going. I just feel fresh. And I would say I'm most creative then. I mean, because of that day off. That's when I'll brainstorm on new ideas or really try and tackle something that's very hard that I've been putting off, because I just feel good. So, and Julie, I think that this is something it might be interesting to try, is like just knowing that you're going to come back, right? So that's really your intention, that the Sunday morning is or the next day is going to be, you're going to jump back in and bright and early and get going. But then you can really relax completely on the day before.
It's not on the same level as an entire day off, but for anyone that's interested, there's an app I don't know if it's available for other devices, but for iPhone, it's called Focus Keeper. And it's like, basically it's just a series of timers. And so you're supposed to work for like 25 minutes and then it gives you like a 5-minute break. And then after like 3 or 4 of those cycles, it gives you like a 30-minute break. And I find that really helpful for just staying focused for a really long period of time. It allows you to be way more productive than if you just take breaks on your own during that time.
Tell us more about that, Ryan. It's Focus Keeper, so it's sort of like an alarm that goes off? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just, yeah. So right now I have it set for working for 25 minutes. And then at the end of that 25 minutes, it'll give a small break. And then I have it set to go for 4 rounds.
Interesting.
And so at the end of the 4 rounds, it'll give a longer break. And you can also choose to skip breaks. Like if you're really in a grind, then you can just click skip.
Interesting. Okay. And then short breaks, what do you do? Just stand up and stretch or something, and then
stand up, stretch, go on Instagram, the usual stuff.
Okay. All right. Good. And then you go back, and then you get the longer break.
Yeah.
Great. Anybody else have anything like that, like Focus Keeper or anything works for you?
Yeah, I think for me personally, during the pandemic, I tried doing, I guess, long breaks. Like maybe if I work solid hours, like, I don't know, 8 to 5, I can take evenings off. I can maybe take 1 day off on the weekend. But then I found that didn't work well for me. And so one thing I told myself is to be kind to myself and not be guilty for taking short breaks, kind of as like Ryan said. So like I now take breaks pretty much whenever it comes to me. Like whenever I feel like, I think a break is good right now, I'll just take it. And whether it's like 10 minutes or an hour, and if it means picking up work later, I don't know, for me, it just feels more natural to just let it happen, I guess.
Okay.
And in the long run, it helps with productivity for me personally.
Okay, and you don't feel guilty when you do that break, right?
Yeah, I think that's the key thing, right? I think it's like this idea of like, oh no, if I give myself a break today and tomorrow, what if I don't, am not able to bounce back and continue to work? My stance would be, oh, okay, then that's just how I'm feeling. I don't have to like feel guilty or constrain myself.
Right. Well, it's a little bit of what Julie expressed, and I'm glad you said that, Julie, because I think that's actually one of the things that worried me for a long time, especially in grad school, was that I couldn't give myself a break because that would be a slippery slope, and then I wouldn't be able to come back. And I think that's where some practice comes in of just try it and knowing that you bound it some way and that you will come back and that you can do that. And that's a really good thing to just be comfortable with and learn, essentially, because you really will. You'd be surprised. Especially part of it is why it's fun to come back is that when you know that you're going to be refreshed and productive, then it's very easy to come back to work.
At the same time, I also want to add that it's good not to, on the flip side, it's good not to pressure yourself that you need to feel relaxed after this day, because I feel like that puts a lot of undue stress on you to like go about your day trying to find things that are relaxing. And if you're not relaxed because you're still stressed, that's going to make you more stressed. So just getting into like the right mindset that like, well, what would I be doing right now if I actually didn't have any work? But it's different for everyone.
Good point. Yeah, it actually requires a little bit of planning because you kind of want to make a plan for that day off so you actually use it, to do something. And you want to think ahead. But I kind of was actually wasn't that hard because there's always something easy to do, there's always a book that I would like to read or something, But yeah, if you give yourself a reward, the main thing is no guilt. You can just do something without, you've told yourself that is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to feel guilty about it. I'm just going to give myself the break, and that is valuable. So I want you to consider it. It's not an assignment, but it's my secret. I've worked incredibly well for me in grad school, and to this day, that just being able to give myself 1 day a week and without any no guilt. So if you want, try it and see if it works for you. I mean, it might be something that could be helpful. There are a lot of techniques out there that will work, and we've touched on some of them here. And I want you to just, think about these things as the week goes on. I think this is an example of one of these things that if you find a technique that will work for you, that's like in this category, that second quadrant, which is that a little bit of time finding those kind of techniques is going to invest in that is going to save you a lot of time and grief and stress later in your life. And since you're grad students, I just want to share that because it was really at grad school that's when it came to me. So I'm going to pass that on. All right. So next topic, next week, we're going to go into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as I mentioned, we have I've given you 3 readings. They're fairly short, but they're a little longer. So the homework is actually this time to read these and actually think about them and prepare some discussion points. So what I really like, they're short essays, the first one is on the white fragility, as I mentioned, which is a real very important reference that I really want you to know about. And then the critique of it that came out this summer, which I think is really interesting as well. And then there's an essay by Scott Page about the diversity bonus from his book. But that's also, I want to talk about that. This topic is very rich and very topical, timely. So we're going to need the full time to talk about it. And I'm going to turn off recording next week. So because I want everybody to be able to speak freely. So if you can't make it on time, and I'll send an email out to everybody, but that we won't be recording it, so you can't watch it later. Okay, I think that's probably good, so everybody feels really comfortable speaking up. Okay, so should be a good discussion. The discussion we had last year was very eye-opening, and I learned a lot too. And we're also we'll also touch on a little bit about gender equity and gender issues, LGBTQ and transgender. And so I want, if you feel uncomfortable about that, just let me know in advance and I'll try to be sensitive to it. But I want to talk about that a little bit too. Some of the new ways of thinking. And I'm very interested in hearing from you guys. So that's why I want you to write down some discussion points before class starts so that we can, you have some points to bring to the discussion, okay? All right, so with that, I want to thank you all and I'll let you go and I'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
See ya, bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Professor.
Yeah.
I had a question. Like a couple weeks ago, you mentioned that you had struggled with saying no to things, and you've struggled with it for a while. I was wondering if you had any good advice for that, because I feel like that's what usually, because I can't say no to things well, I end up feeling like it deals with what we talked about today, having to manage my time more because I can't do the other stuff that I want to do. I was wondering what your advice was on that.
I have to tell you, that's something I still struggle with, and it's partly because there's so many things I'm interested in, I want to do, and also I always felt that it was somehow my responsibility, and that I had that, and now I've come to realize that I can say no. It's much better than saying yes and not doing the job well, right? So I've done that a few times to the point where I was like, I should have said no. I didn't do anyone a favor. So I think that is very interesting, Michael. I wish I had a really good, answer to that, and I'm still working on it. But there's certain categories. Oh, I think I may have mentioned, I do have this excuse list. Did I ever tell you that? Oh, okay. So here's the tip. I have a list of excuses that I've put together over the years that are very, graciously saying, thank you for thinking of me. I'm sorry, but I can't give this important task the time it deserves. All kinds of language like that, I sort of pull from. And also sometimes I've had people decline my requests very gracefully, and so I put that into the excuse list, because then I'll remember, like, that worked because it made it, it worked for me, so I'll use it for someone else. But I think that having some of those pre-packaged is really helpful, right? Because there's very gracious ways of saying no, and usually it's just like, the compliment sandwich we talked about earlier, which is, it's so nice of you. That's such an important task and such an honor, but I cannot do it now. And then, thanking them. That makes it a lot easier to do. So try that. That's one thing I've figured out over the years.
Okay, thank you. And now
Right.
that you say it, that does remind me. I think you might have mentioned the excuse list. I had forgotten about that. You might have mentioned.
Okay. All right. Okay. Good. Yeah, the excuse list. Someday I'll publish that. No, I can't publish it because that's the thing is, like, if I did that, it would be useless in the future. So I can't release that. But I appreciate your saying about being late, because that was interesting how many people are also like that. Because I have that, and I don't consider it a positive attribute really, but it's just like, it's very hard to fix. Okay, anybody else have anything before we go? All right.
Oh,
go ahead. Robin was waiting. Then go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, I mean, I had a question about one of the things we touched upon in today's discussion, but I'd probably feel more comfortable talking about it not on the recording. So.
Oh yeah, let's turn the recording off. I'll do that. Wait, let me see. Stop recording.